I will start off by inviting Professor Aminu Mamman to make his intervention, the 10-minute intervention he is going to be giving relates to capacity development in Africa. Over to you, Aminu.
Okay, thank you very much, Admos, and thank you all for joining us to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Pan-African movement. I will call it a movement. For the next 10 minutes, I would like to talk about the vision of our forefathers and also try to ask the question where we are now in terms of human capital development. Human capital development, from my perspective, is narrowly defined. It doesn't cover all the other areas such as health and social capital and the rest. But I'm just looking at the skills, knowledge, and capacity to deliver development, and also for self-employment, for example. So I will be asking this question, and then how can we retrace ourselves back to our forefathers' vision? So I start as an introduction to say that despite what many people say, I believe Africa had and continue to have great leaders. So when we hear people saying the problem of Africa is lack of leadership, I beg to disagree. Even at present, we have great leaders. The problem is we define leaders narrowly to focus on political leadership. But even on this panel, we've seen from the beginning, we had great leaders. So we do have leaders in the past and the present. The issue is whether we have critical mass of leaders. That's where the issue is. But going back to the issue of the vision of our forefathers, what was their vision? Their vision was basically freedom. Freedom from, if you ask the question, from what rather than from who? I think most of the discussion over the years has been saying freedom from colonialization, which is freedom from who? But I think many people realize that it's more of a mental freedom as opposed to the political. Of course, political is important, but the mental freedom is very important. But then from there, you ask the question, freedom to do what? And also freedom to be what? So those are three important questions when we talk about the vision of our founding fathers. They wanted Africa to be free mentally and to do what they want to do and to be what they want to be. Now the question is, what do they want to be? Now this is where we go back to the concept of Ubuntu. Basically, the vision was to be human. The Africans want to be human. The concept of humanness is very critical to the African psyche. And we will see what being human is towards the end. So we know their vision. We know their concept of freedom. And what is their concept of human capital? Their concept of human capital basically is about education that produce men and women who are not self-centered, who put the interests of the nation above personal interests. That's their vision of human capital. Education to them should be an organic process with a high level of consistency between activities and desired outcome. I emphasize the desired outcome. because what then defines the outcome? The outcome is humanity, to be human. That's the outcome. So that's briefly their conception. Now, Dixon Munganzi notes in defining education from the African perspective that individual's place in society was determined more by his contribution to its well-being. The individual had to be trained to remain sensitive to the needs of the community as a whole and others as individuals. So this is human capital. And if we contrast it with where we are now, our educational and vocational system is understandably skewed towards producing graduates with knowledge and skill for the purpose of material wealth and job creation. It is not about being human, even though knowledge and skills and material acquisition is part of being human, but that by itself doesn't constitute humanity from Ubuntu perspective. That's not enough. And the second point about our current education system is that human qualities that cannot be easily quantified or demonstrate material value do not feature prominently in the educational system, in the educational curriculum. So we emphasize the IQ side rather than the emotional side of education. Ubuntu, the African psyche, to be human is not just about your IQ, it's not just about your intelligence, but also it's about your emotional intelligence, how you relate to the community. And the third aspect of our current educational system is the inadequate focus on social cultural context of Africa. So B.S. Kwakwa argues, he said the effect of Western type of education has been to produce three nations in one country, each unable to communicate effectively with the others. So what are those three nations? He said there is one nation which is composed of the educated, properly educated in quotes. Then you have the second nation, many who do not understand the ways of the educated. So they have the IQ, but the IQ is supposed to demonstrate certain behavior, but they don't understand it. So this is the second nation in one country. The third nation, according to B.S. Kwakwa, is that these are half educated who understand neither the ways of their own indigenous society nor those of the highly educated. So this is the outcome when you develop an educational system which is devoid of the humanness that Ubuntu advocates, which our founding fathers from their initial stage of developing the African institutions, using professors like Professor Bafwa in Nigeria. There are a lot of professors that were used to develop educational curriculum in Africa, which was, they didn't mention Ubuntu, but when you look at what they wanted to achieve, was actually Ubuntu, which is, it's not just producing people with a high IQ, but people who are deep-seated. So how do we retrace our steps? I use the African proverb that says you cannot change the taste of soup by changing the pot. So you can't be moving people from one system to the other from one structure to the other, expecting the people will change. So how do we change them? The way to change them is through cultivation of individual communal responsibility. And also, as Woolman argues, that the tradition of African education have common elements, namely informal, and occurs in context of family, community, clan, and culture. So to retrace our steps, go back to our vision, we have to go back to look at the curriculum that actually look at these key elements of the family, the community, the clan, and the culture, rather than just focusing on the IQ. So the further answer to this question lies in the distinction between knowledge and knowing. Knowledge is to do with current IQ-based education system, while the latter is about being. And being here is being human and becoming, to be somebody that is connected to the community. And coming to know as has a propensity to encourage the formation of the epitemistic virtues. So we, in other words, what I'm trying to say here is a critique to the current educational system. But as I acknowledge, we already have leaders, but these leaders, they don't form the critical mass. And to develop the human capital, because we don't know who is gonna end up in the public service and those who are going to be in the private sector. If we were to know those who are destined, then we can narrow our curriculum to focus on those on a public service. But we don't know. So if we don't know, what we need to do is to develop an Ubuntu curriculum. And some of the elements that we may have to look at are incorporating togetherness, kindness, brotherhood, equality, sharing, sympathy, empathy, compassion, respect, tolerance, humanness, harmony, modesty, friendliness, redistribution, obedience, and helpfulness into the curriculum, rather than narrowly focus on curriculum that is designed for the production of material wealth. So that's where I stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aminu, for that intervention. Like I said, we're going to have all three, and then we'll have a general discussion at the end. But your discussion about the vision of the founding fathers and how in some ways there's been this failure to decolonize the learning system in Africa, and your suggestions about trying to anchor it on this idea of Ubuntu is something that we can discuss further. I would like to invite Mrs. Sally Ncube now to talk to us about her own perspective of gender issues on the African continent. So what has happened 75 years ago in Manchester, there was this vision of a decolonized Africa, where has decolonized produced gender equality in Africa. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Sally Ncube to come on now and give us her 10-minute intervention.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone from Zimbabwe, and congratulations to all of us for all the collective work that we are doing towards an African society that is empowering, that continue to embrace inclusive growth across generations. So As said, my name is Ncube. I'm a feminist and development practitioner based in Zimbabwe, but I make time to contribute to struggles in other African countries, now virtually, and sometimes I dive in to do voluntary work in supporting women's rights and gender equality. So when we look at the status of Africa now, as it relates to women and gender equality, I would say by numbers, we still have women being the majority in terms of population. Women being the majority who are frontliners when we have to confront emergencies, when we have to deal with political organizing at door-to-door high-risk areas. So in all economies, in all political spaces, we see women being on the front line, women taking responsibility, women healing families and communities, and women taking responsibility to feed nations at various levels. So in terms of progress, I'm happy to celebrate that I have been a beneficiary coming from a rural community and also working in the women's rights movements and getting exposure as an African to serve in the continent and to access education. So yes, when we look at how Africa have progressed and have grown, we see that Africa have signed up to international instruments and commitments that provides for gender equality and women's rights. So if they are established gender implementing machineries, so we now have ministries, dedicated departments, dedicated focal persons in the governance infrastructure at community level, regional level within countries, national level, and then with various ways of organizing where there is progress, where African governments and leadership have paid attention to say we need established institutions to pay attention to issues of gender equality and women's rights. So we now have also platforms for review, for holding each other to account, for periodic national and regional reports to reflect on the status of women's rights and gender equality implementation. So for instance, this year, there have been, last year, November, Africa came together to reflect on progress around the implementation of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and came up with a political declaration of addressing the gaps that were identified collectively. So we now see also women as rights holders stepping up to take up leadership opportunities, to push back where what is not working for them, they now hold to transform the status quo. They now take responsibility to push back on what is not working and reviewing the frameworks that are existing and providing solutions or visioning together with others, men on board and boys and girls as well, to say what kind of a society do we want? Now, in terms of the gaps, we still have gaps in terms of representation. So when we look at representation of women in leadership in all sectors, Africa is still lagging behind. So beyond political commitments written, even enshrined in some African countries' constitutions, we still see non-compliance to those laws and policies with impunity. So we still see some African governments being comfortable appointing cabinets that do not have gender parity, and they just feel like it's okay. We still have institutions that continue to put even by language in policies and commitments that there's a line that says subject to availability of funding. Yet we have reforms that do not need resources, but just attitude and behavior change. We still have administrative cultural practices that continue to rob women of what Africa have committed to do in terms of gender equality. Violence against women is that increase, and our response mechanisms and machineries have weaknesses that they are not stepping up to be strengthened by resource, by practice, by speedy turnaround to reduce all forms of violence against women. And with the emerging threat of online gender-based violence, we see an increase of women really, even if there is a digital divide, for those that are accessing online spaces, they are also beginning to throw away the opportunities, or being scared or being too cautious to not embrace opportunities that comes in because of the online violence that comes in with it, and the lack of responsiveness of the companies that are also providing these services. We still see impunity. The higher the patriarchal or bad behavior of perpetuating gender-based violence, the more the impunity becomes. So we still see high-level leadership perpetrating gender-based violence with impunity and normalizing violence against women. The care work issue linked to infrastructure that is not enabling for women to have time for adequate participation is still an issue. And then women are still being treated as projects and small and medium enterprises. So by political positioning of women in the economy, we still are keeping women busy to put food on the table for the day and go on the road again as cross-border traders. So the economic empowerment models are also still not sustainable. They are just tokenistic and treating women as projects and not multi-generational or looking into wealth creation across generations. The education is still reinforcing marginalization of women and reinforcing stereotypes that divide gender. Our history is still male and of a particular generation and not youthful. So for women who contributed into the decolonization project of Africa, they are still invisible, unrecognized, and unacknowledged even in our education curriculum. Our African knowledge system are still demonized. They are still not treated seriously or not acknowledged as form of knowledge. They are still being treated as backward, demonic, evil, and some are manipulating them as the way the colonial tools would use issues such as rape and marginalization of women to normalize the position of women in the society. So in terms of opportunities, I see that the starting point is also just truth-telling. We have lies where there are some untold stories of what exactly happened on our pathway to independence. What were the gains when we were negotiating? What did we lose? So that each generation knows that as it takes its own struggle and responsibility, we are grounded on the truth that happened in the continent. So we have intergenerational disconnect where some generations are holding other generations at ransom, feeling like they are on something, and they're just not telling the truth. Because some of the things people just need you to acknowledge the losses that we got, and then we can build together stronger. So we have people denying, not taking responsibility of what happened and not just telling the truth. So truth-telling is our first opportunity to create platform for intergenerational learning and sharing what happened to Africa and what's going on so that we have collective ownership of the continent moving forward. Institution strengthening to focus on also reforms that do not require funding and also changing behavior in terms of administration, architecture, by attitude, by how things are done. Some of the women are just lagging behind because of access to documentation. So for you to get a loan, you need an identity document. For you to access education, you need an identity document, even political office. So women are left behind just on access to documentation issues in most of the African countries. And then issues of accountability, holding each other to account, not take it as an external issue, as a World Bank issue, as a Western issue, but as acknowledging, because traditionally and culturally, we had a way and we have practices of holding each other to account. So engraving and taking responsibility to strengthen our accountability mechanism is an opportunity. And enforcing punishments for those that do not comply with the commitments of gender equality. And then ending impunity and acknowledging and affirming women as contributors to the African continent. And then rights holders and duty bearers taking responsibility, because there's a lot of blame game and running away from responsibility. And then our service delivery, strengthening our institutions, it is a priority. Because now with COVID-19, we see a lot of development investment going towards water bowsers. Why not just do an overhaul of the whole water delivery system, because there are waterborne diseases that we're exposed to. So we have seen some development investment broadening or widening the gender parity gap because people are just throwing money with interventions that are not sustainable, not doing an overhaul of the whole service delivery system. And then our African research and knowledge management, I'm excited about this Africa Research Group. It is a space that we need to continue owning, celebrating our own knowledge and pushing back on some of the knowledge that is retrogressive that we are being forced to appreciate. So generally, the issue again is around budget allocation. So we have seen that with resources, whether it's by development investment, women's rights work, gender equality work is under-resourced. And then for those that invest in countries, they are not using the gender equality indicator as a compliance issue. And when bilateral agreements are being negotiated, there is no a human rights or gender equality assessment so that we create an inclusive economy. So I commit to say there is progress, but we can do more. And we remain with other sisters. I remain excited by platforms like this, because we then get to sharpen each other and acknowledge what we can do well and push forward and pay it forward to other generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And I think it links very nicely with what Dr. Amani said early on, from starting from that single female participant at the 1945 conference in Manchester, and then, projecting to the current period where there's been some progress made in acknowledging the gender disparities, but sometimes actions falling short of what's required for the kind of transformation of society that we're looking for. Thank you for that. We'll come back to discussions later on, but I would like to move on now to Professor Paul Mativenga, who is somebody who works on technology himself. And so we've asked him to come and talk about that. How do we decolonize Africa's development? What are the challenges of technology and what are the prospects? Paul.
Atmos, can I request to share something? Can you allocate me the sharing rights?
Yes, Emma, can you do that? If you are.
That should work now.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's a big challenge, I think, to follow after the powerful presentation by Sally. Just for context, I think Atmos requested that I talk on technology development and the prospects for COVID-19 recovery. And apologies, I modified that, and I want to look at survival and recovery. And for context, my background is quite different from all the previous speakers before. So I am an engineer, and I primarily look at how to make things at different scale, things that are so small that we cannot see them, and things that are so large in terms of scale. I also look at how we make them at conventional speed and how we make them very, very fast. I particularly look at what is the impact of making products on the environment, on the energy we use, and on the ecosystems that we use to make the products. So that's my academic portfolio and interest. In the Faculty of Science and Engineering, I'm the academic lead for impact on society and the academic lead for equality, diversity, inclusion, and access. So I'm specifically interested in how multidimensional diversity enables innovation. I've put here a few points of reflection in terms of COVID-19. I think the key part of the message for me today and the realization from the pandemic is the need for a national manufacturing platform and capability with flexibility to innovate and reconfigure at speed and scale. We have seen in the UK the challenges in providing face masks, the challenges in manufacturing respirators. Those challenges are compounded in Africa. And we have also seen, I think, the importance of the digital component and the importance of modeling and health capability. We take for granted here that we can exercise the key aspects of our prevention, hands, face, and space. Imagine in Africa, in a community where there's no access to water and you have to keep your hands clean. How do you do that? Imagine in a society where there is no access to energy and electricity and you have to deliver education online. How do you do that? Imagine an infrastructure which is struggling, roads, houses, shanty towns. How do we deliver that in a pandemic? And those are the key challenges that are here now that will be compounded in the future. And I think those are the main areas of challenge and opportunity for engineers. And a key part for us as engineers is how we engineer the future, how we design and enable the future we want. So I've done a lot of engagements in Africa, and having been born in Zimbabwe and engaging significantly with a number of universities. And my key area of research is looking at technology. But the key aspects I think I want to emphasize in terms of technology and design is that it's not just about the goods that we make from technology. More importantly, it's about the people that make the goods. It's about the way we make the goods. It's about the spaces we make the goods. It's about the ecosystems where the goods are made. So if you look at that, that is what makes innovation in Africa distinctive. It's about the African people, about their needs, about their spaces, about their ecosystems, and about their resources. And I think these are the key dimensions that we need to look at and that we need to build upon. So in engaging in Africa, a key part is understanding the development context, the continental, national, regional, and community needs. And I'm happy that I think there was reference before to Agenda 2063. And Agenda 2063, a key phrase for that is the Africa we want. So the future for Africa is determined by what Africa wants and the key requirements for the societies. And there are also other relevant national strategies that we look at. And a key component for our engagement in Africa is capacity development, not building, because there's already capacity in Africa. It's how we co-develop the existing capacity and enabling mutual benefits of collaboration. So it's about sustainable partnerships, technologies, processes, and systems. And it's about us researching with partners and not for partners. And a key dimension of my research is the interface between the uplifting the economy and the society needs and the environment. And most of our innovation comes and originates from society. And at the moment, we are looking at the pandemic, COVID-19. A key consideration is the high inventory of resources that we now have to procure, face masks, and the packaging, for example, that comes with face masks and all the other equipment that we need. Very important in terms of fighting the pandemic, but what are the challenges that we are creating, for example, for the ecosystems? We know the challenges with single-use plastics. So I think the Africa we want, and I think the Africa that we should be developing is an Africa which develops green technologies and companies that embrace the challenges of the COVID pandemic, but the key and critical aspects of a climate emergency and the opportunities for green products. And the key part in consideration are the economic, social, and environmental benefits that are particular to Africa. And in a key aspect is looking at how we maximize value from the significant resources available in Africa. A key challenge for Africa is how we move towards high value manufacturing and how we promote our ecosystems. I think it's quite interesting how the Pan African movement and the SDGs are well aligned, as well as the Agenda 2065. And so my research, to give you context, is driven by really the challenges we meet in terms of our demand for resources and the opportunity for Africa as a primary supplier of these materials, and how we can effectively take part in the circular economy value chain. And also looking at the opportunities for green and more sustainable energy, and even moving forward to look at the challenges for the environment in terms of different product categories, and how Africa can be at the forefront of the next industrial revolution. I also, more importantly, Africa is rich in minerals and resources, and we originate most of the resources that make products, and we need to embrace the circular economy, be involved in how products are remanufactured, recycled, and be involved in the next design revolution for looking at the opportunities for products that we can bring back to life at the end of usage. So a key message for me, and I think a key opportunity, is Africa engaging in the digital and smart manufacturing revolution, driven by the interests and values and the Africa we want. I think there are key opportunities and key challenges for energy, for water, for infrastructure that are still critical in Africa and compounded by the pandemic. And these are really urgent to address. And I think there's a great opportunity in looking forward, in growing our industry, in growing our technology, to know that we could do this in a smarter way and in moving towards more sustainable resources and products, and to embrace the circular economy, live within our planetary boundaries and emissions, and to re-emphasize COVID-19 has brought to focus the importance of national manufacturing capabilities, so that Africa can respond to pandemics using its own capability and using its own knowledge capital. Thank you.